Hi everyone, I'm Jeanai La Vita here today with American composer Charles Fussell. We're going to speak with you about his life and career and his long legacy composing music in America.
Hello, it's very glad to be here.
So Charles, we've had the benefit of many hours together speaking, and now I would love for you to tell everyone about your life in the United States as an American composer. Maybe starting with your early musical life. We know you grew up in Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
Yes.
Yeah.
A very musical city. As I told you earlier, a few years ago, the North Carolina School of the Arts did a program of my choral music. And I went to speak to the composers there. They were all undergraduates, young people. And one of the topics that came up was what was life like there when I was young. And I told them what a musical environment was, how good it was, particularly the public schools, which were first class. Music taught by utterly professionals at every level and supported lavishly. I once had a catalog of all the music in the public schools in Winston-Salem. And there was a belief in the school system there. There was no what I called there was no accounting of how many people would grow up to be musicians. They didn't care about that. They just thought that it was important for everyone who wanted to learn how to read music and have some association with it. And they had orchestras, not bands. They had bands. But the bands were only for the band jocks, you know. What they had was different levels of orchestras, string players, and really orchestras. And it was thought that choirs and orchestras could get the greatest participation and that should be available for anyone who wanted it throughout the whole system, all the way from elementary school to high school. And it was first class. It was taught by very first class people, many of whom I remember vividly, who were themselves professional musicians. And the city was also filled with quite good piano teachers for young people. And they were all people who had graduated conservatories and knew what they were doing. I had 2 or 3 of them. In other words, when you were very young, I started when I was 7, and I had a very good teacher. I remember her very well.
And you had parents who were so supportive, right? They
were very supportive, although they thought, I'm sure, wondered, what in the world have we wrought? But it had to do with the climate of respectability in the city and availability in the public sector. There was a quite good orchestra. There was chorus. There was an attempt to make an opera school there. There was a school of music, a little one called Salem College. And that had a big influence on the city, life of the city. The Moravians, I should mention the Moravians, because they are Protestant, you know, but they had, all their ministers were composers. In fact, several of them were correspondence students of Haydn.
How amazing.
And when they have an archive now, a music archive, which is a major archive of not only their composers, write the anthems and so forth, and symphonias that they wrote, they have an original set of parts for the Creation.
Wow. That
was sent over by Haydn or someone who knew him, which they were performing parts of, or all of, I don't know, when the New England composers were forbidding any music in the churches except a cappella, no instruments, you know. So the climate is an interesting thing to look at, the musical climate in certain periods of, from the Northeast all the way down the coast, because that's where music was, into New Orleans, basically, and how it changed from the north to the mid-Atlantic to the south and to the very southern New Orleans tradition.
I was in touch with Moravian to fortunately collect some of your music myself, your chamber music for voice, your opera scores. And I'd be interested to hear, how did you first get interested in composition? You started out as a piano student.
I did, like everybody. I was very intrigued with orchestral sound and instrumental sound. And I had, luckily, good teachers from the start who thought a child should know something about chords and harmony and tonality and so forth. And all my teachers were interested in the fact that I was intrigued with scores. I wanted to see a score as well as to hear it. I once told a group of people that what's called a good ear, in my opinion, is what you hear and what you see. I always wanted to confirm what I heard with what I saw on the printed page. The first opera I ever saw was Così fan tutte, through a little company that tried it there. I have no idea how it was, but I thought, that is just fascinating. What does it look like? And fortunately, Salem College had a very good music library, and I could go down there, get the score to Così and a recording, and listen and look. And I always, that combination of what instruments sounded like, particularly what orchestra sounded like, and singers, was the thing that intrigued me the most.
What are your earliest memories of composing yourself?
I wrote a couple of anthems that were done. They were sung by various Moravian churches. I don't know where they are or what they were like, but they weren't bad. And then I wrote 2 orchestral pieces, which were done by the local orchestra. The first one was, I was probably 16 or so, was an essay for orchestra. I had heard the Sam Barber's essays, and I thought, that's a good title. So I tried an orchestral piece, and it was done. I heard it was performed. I still have the score. It's not terrible.
That's really fantastic. In post-war America,
yes, exactly.
It sounds like there was a fair amount of local support.
In the 50s.
Remarkably.
Absolutely.
Especially in the South. Yeah.
They had a nice conductor, a very nice man, John Yulee. And he thought, well, here I was the only one in town writing an orchestral piece at my age, you know,
yes,
13, 14, teenager.
Wow.
So he looked at it, he thought, well, that's doable and civilized. And it was for a young fellow, you know.
And did that solidify your path, so to speak, for college? Like, did you at that point?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. The other thing that was a big influence, the Brevard Music Festival in the summer. That was the home of the Cincinnati Symphony in the summer. So they did everything. I remember hearing Das Lied von der Erde. And I remember playing one of the piano parts in the Saint-Saëns Third Symphony. They did a lot. And so I went every summer, 5 years in high school.
Wow.
There, and heard a tremendous amount of music. And there I had my first composition lesson from a percussionist who had decided to be a composer. And so he looked at something of mine, and I had regular lessons with him. It was very helpful.
Yeah.
So by the time I went to the Eastman School, when I was 18, I had a pretty good background in music.
And you told me before that at Eastman you were able to study composition in an atmosphere that was not restrictive and according to the trends of the time.
It had everything. And you were not, we're talking now about the late 50s. The European influence of serial music had come over here. All the composers like Schoenberg had to come here, many others.
Eastman, you said you had the opportunity to operate as a collaborative pianist for singers.
Yes.
That's really exceptional. I think as a composer to have that sort of relationship early on with singers.
Oh, all the different. I went as a double major, pianist and composer.
Oh, piano performance and
Yes.
composition.
But I very quickly realized, I didn't play piano that well. I played well for Winston-Salem, but when I got an atmosphere where there were real pianists, I knew where things stood. But I could play well enough to play for the singers who were my friends, and I loved doing that, their lessons, and for the opera department eventually. So I played a lot of piano. But I was not a solo pianist, and the repertoire that I could learn was limited. And my very good piano teacher understood that right away. So he didn't push me. I told him one day, he thought I tried to play the Winter Wind Etude of Chopin. And I said to Jose Achanes one day, I could practice this thing for a whole year. I still couldn't play it. He said, I know. And so we went back to a simpler repertoire. But he was a wonderful man, and it was a wonderful experience. I played enough to do what I wanted to do, which was eventually move into conducting. And so I became pianist for the opera department and the chorus and all its individual singers. And so I began to write for them.
Certainly, from a singer's perspective, having the amazing benefit of singing music by a composer who not only collaborated with singers, who was a professional conductor, exceedingly high-level pianist, whatever you might...
I was pretty good. Yeah, I was pretty good.
It makes such a big difference. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you found, the process, writing for the voice and instruments, because you have a remarkable ability to balance, but also to bring out textures in the orchestration, in the piano lines when it was originally written for just piano and voice, and then went on, like some of your chamber music, to be then fleshed out for instruments, and certainly your operas. How do you feel about that really fantastic characteristic of yours?
I suppose had I gone to New England Conservatory or Juilliard, I might have had the same opportunities. I'm sure I would. But the Eastman School I valued my experience there so much because the climate was very fully developed in opera and voice. They had a big voice department. They were all retired Metropolitan Opera singers. And then there were a lot of composers there. Howard Hanson was the head, and my teacher was a man named Bernard Rogers. And Bernard was open to any music. He, if you wrote 12-note music, that was fine by him. He just approached it and would talk to you in terms of his musical value and what he could understand. But he was not opposed to it. And in fact, there was a very wide musical climate for a composer there. And even I had a very good conducting teacher who I remember taking an excerpt from Wozzeck in with another pianist conductor there. And at the end, we asked him what he thought of it. And that was totally foreign to him. But he said, well, that's of your generation. He accepted it, but he knew that for him he was from an earlier generation, and suffered a great deal from had to get out of Europe in the war. So there was a very open climate.
It sounds like you had a lot of support to explore your own style.
That's exactly right.
And how do
I wasn't pushed here or there.
Not compartmentalized, not put in a box.
If I'd been really on the East Coast, I would have been advised to really consider non-tonal music, post-World War II, the new music, Boulez and the Schoenberg influence and all that, and Darmstadt. I knew about it all.
Of course.
And I was interested in it all.
Certainly, as a scholar.
But I wasn't pushed to do this or to do that. I remember trying to write some 12-tone music. Everybody did.
And as you developed your own style, do you feel like there's any value in people, saying, oh, well, you're neo-romantic or neoclassical, or is that frustrating?
No. I had a piece done by the Seattle Symphony, the orchestration of the Goethe Lieder. It was done for a tenor and orchestra there. And then I had a good composer in L.A., Lenny Rosenman, he wrote film scores, but he was a very avant-garde composer. And he introduced me as he wanted to play. He invited friends over his house one night to hear the Goethe Lieder performance. And he introduced me as a neo-romantic, I think. And he said, "Do you mind being called that?" I said, "I don't mind being called anything." And then we played the tape. And the Goethe Lieder are mostly a tonal work. At one point, a certain way of approaching tonality, I always felt, by then I sort of knew what I wanted to do. I felt that music that I was hearing, for instance with Mr. Carter, in which there's a pedal is not anything that roots a chord. There are no chords that have roots. If you have a pedal, it doesn't stabilize the music. Roger Sessions was the same. That was not for me, because my own background as a pianist, I'd studied Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, Bach, and that was implanted in my ear. I remember one of the first realizations I had is if you wrote absolutely chromatic music and no chords that had any tonal attributes, then you could never modulate. The music was just high, medium, or low, but you could never lift the level. If a pedal wasn't a pedal, you couldn't lift it or lower it.
Right, no hierarchy, right?
No hierarchy.
Which was a big...
And that I didn't want to do that.
Yeah, that's
I
going to
didn't
be a new
believe
school.
it worked. Mm-hmm. And one person I know who studied at Brandeis said they spent an entire semester analyzing the rows in the Schoenberg trio. And I said, well, that sounds like the goddamnest boring thing I've ever heard of. I had a composer tell me one time, he said, "You write wrong notes." I said, "What do you mean?" I knew what he meant. He meant that I didn't exclude references to tonality from the music I was writing. I didn't exclude it. And occasionally tried to capitalize on it. And that sounded all wrong to me. It sounded like an ungelled mixture. And so I told him, well, you just have to listen till they sound right to me. So you have to listen to either they sound right to you or that you just jettison. It's not in your interest.
And when you write for the voice, for instance, how does the text influence your writing of melody? And I'll hedge saying harmonies, but the contours, the harmonic language,
everything.
It's everything.
And the text has everything to do. Your first obligation is it has to be understandable. The incredible genius was Puccini. He knew how to have a voice sing and have the orchestra play at the top of their volume and not cover it. Because he knew where the singer had to be in order to come across a very big orchestra for Puccini. Any of the works do that. From Madame Butterfly, they have Girl of the Golden West, which is a really wonderful opera. Puccini was a genius at that.
Now, when you were composing, especially, large works or works that had more than just piano and voice, for instance, what came first? Or even piano and voice? Did you hear a melody and have to write it down immediately? Or how did you work as a composer? Were you up all night?
I sat down to compose, and I found that every time I sat down determined to do it, I could do it. Every time. Distraction, if someone comes in or you have a lunch date or you have a record, something else on the radio or whatever, No, no, no. If you sit down quietly and are determined to do it, I simply never sat down that I couldn't do it.
That's
There was no problem.
no writer's block.
I didn't have it. And what my concerns were, if it was a voice, if a setting of text, I was concerned with how I felt about the text overall. I learned from Mr. Rogers, who wrote a lot of operas, music is not illustration. So that doesn't mean you never illustrate, but it does mean that is if you try to follow every word from an illustrative point of view, you can't do it. Then the thing never moves forward. And that's not the essence of melody. The essence of melody is a line that is extended. So if your whole point of view is trying to imitate the emotion, whatever you think it is, of every phrase or word, you'll never get anywhere. That's the first thing you have to figure out.
And are you saying that also with the idea that then the interpreter picks up that responsibility in terms of imbuing it with, the emotional content?
Oh, yes.
Right?
Oh, yeah. And that comes not only from a beautiful voice, but it also comes from what the singer's attitude toward text is. And actually, a singer he has to project a text. That's why Bach always works. That's why Handel is the incredible genius. And
Tell us about your relationship with Virgil Thomson.
well, I knew him about the last 16 or 17 years of his life. And I met him by accident in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, where he would visit friends of his every summer. And they invited me for lunch one time. And that's the first time I ever met him. And we got along very well. And he said, if you're in New York, come see me. So I called the mutual friends and said, do you think he meant that? Can I try to call him up? He said, absolutely. So I called him up and we went and had lunch and we got along very well. But he was a very interesting person to me. He was acerbic as he could be.
Really?
He could be. But he was smart, and he had thought a great deal about music. And his last book was Music with Words. He had thought about that his whole life, and that's why the song cycles that he wrote and the operas are so memorable.
You said something earlier about he had a very specific opinion about the way masterpieces are recycled, and
he was critic for quite a number of years for the New York Herald Tribune as in its late years. And his pet peeve was the way he started out right away attacking the New York Phil and the agents that tried to sell the orchestra's soloists of one sort or another. And they passed around the same soloists and the same works in all the major orchestras. And he described them as the 50 accepted masterpieces that everybody did. Cleveland or everyone went over the same repertoire. And he just hated that. They would particularly not do any new American music.
We recycle these operas, and obviously there's this sense of drawing in the audience, and what's familiar is going to sell tickets. However, I feel like it has held back composers of your generation, where there hasn't been an equal representation, equal balance.
Well, I think so. Virgil thought so. It affected his life considerably. Because he was considered the arch conservative.
Really, how so? As a neo-romantic, right?
He wrote tonal music,
right?
And sometimes he wrote a kind of minimal music. So was the man I studied with, Boris Blacher. Boris Blacher was a tonal, often not completely, but tonal, very simple conservative composer, like Virgil became. But the people who were smart and listened to Virgil's music especially from the Four Saints in Three Acts opera on to the Mother of Us All, which is very popular, still produced all the time, know that there's a good deal more to it than the fact that much of it's in C major or D major or whatever. That doesn't tell you anything.
It's amazing. Radicalism is so relative.
It's so
right?
relative. You can be relative in the pullback sense, which Ger was for Stravinsky. If he had lived longer, who knows where he would have gone. He should have lived a little longer. He tried to write a couple more operas, on Edgar Allan Poe. The Met commissioned him to write The Fall of the House of Usher, and there exist fragments for it, but he never fulfilled the commission.
Now, your opera, The Astronaut's Tale,
Yes.
has ties to L'Histoire du Soldat, right?
Oh, yes. Jack Larson, who wrote the text, had done the best translation of L'Histoire for San Francisco Symphony. And it's published, and it's very good. Everyone should do that if they're going to do it. The original text for L'Histoire translation is too much, it's too long. It just swamps the music, and it's mostly too long. And then people add addenda to it to try to modernize it. That makes it even worse. And so Jack did a very good translation. And he said that he got the idea from that of trying to do his own version modernized, not the story of the devil and the soldier, but his idea was to write about a young man from the Midwest who grows up, a farm boy, wants to become an astronaut. And he does. In the course of his life, the only trouble is his first flight is the Challenger, and he's killed. And then what? That's what interested Jack. Then what for his wife, for instance? What happens after all of that? After all of that life and work and ambition and fulfilling your dreams, so to speak, in the Midwestern farm boy sense, which is an American myth. But what if it explodes?
And what is the legacy? That's a great question, right?
What then, And Jack, that was very personal to him because his partner, Jim Bridges, had died of cancer. And Jack was an older man then. And he had a lot of trouble with the ending. When he sent me the libretto, said, "Would you be interested in this?" I said, "Oh, definitely." It appealed to me very much, but he hadn't been able to do the ending, and not for a long time did he finish it. But I think anyone who has seen The Astronaut's Tale, it's been done a lot,
The most
realizes
recent.
that this is no joke. It starts off as an American fairy tale myth, but then it turns. And then when it turns, it gets very interesting. Nancy Rhodes certainly understood that fully.
Certainly. The Encompass Productions.
Yes, it was the best it's ever had. It was so spectacular. It was really spectacular. And but she understood it right away. I knew she did. So it's a story. It's Jack's. He thought it could go do the L'Histoire and after intermission the Astronaut's Tale. They're each about an hour. And he thought they could make an evening. And he's asked me, did I mind that? Would I feel like it's being compared to the L'Histoire? I said, not at all. It isn't anything like L'Histoire. The music is not like L'Histoire. So I don't consider them a competition to each other. And I really didn't. I felt confident enough about it that feel it could stand its own without being compared to L'Histoire, which is a great score.
Certainly.
People had all sorts of reactions to it, good and bad.
Do you feel it's misunderstood?
It's a strange text. It's a strange story. And if you don't pay attention to it, I told an audience one time, Nancy asked me to speak to her supporters. And I said to them that when he's killed, that's not the end of the story. And that interested them very much. Like, what could you do after that? I didn't try to explain it, but I said, that's not the end. It goes on.
You have a dream, you strive, and then,
It may turn out well, it may not, or fulfilled, it may not. It's the luck.
Yeah.
And you're very lucky if you reach my age and are reasonably decent help. Most of my family didn't reach anything like this age. I never expected to. I don't think anybody does. And I remember as a child, I didn't understand what a century was. I asked my father, what's a century? And he told me, and I said, do you think I'll live to see the turn of this century? And he was a realist. He said, maybe. He didn't say yes.
But he didn't say no.
He didn't say no. He said maybe. He was definitely a realist. But those things are...
And you have this immense contribution through your music, certainly. I mean, you were nominated for 3 Pulitzer Prizes. Tell us about that process.
Well, you're not thinking about that when you're working. But now at my age, I realize there's an awful lot of music. I didn't realize how much there was. And I worked hard all my life. I always thought of that as my main business. As you know, I taught at several different schools, but I never considered that my main business.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed it, and it brings you in contact with other musicians and musical, both professional and as far as your students are concerned. But I always thought I tried to keep going with my music, and I was always interested in some larger or some bigger project. So I had a gift for doing big works.
Mm-hmm.
Some of people I've known don't do that. They do wonderful chamber music. But I could do the bigger things that took a couple of years.
What attracted you to those large works?
I don't know.
Just came from inside.
I think probably what I read. I was always an avid reader. And fiction, I read a lot of fiction. And I read a lot of poetry. The first really large score was a liturgical drama called Julian, after the Flaubert St. Julian.
Mm-hmm.
Short story. And I got a commission to do a big anniversary piece for Salem College, which was the big oldest school in North Carolina at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I had ties with Salem College, and I wanted to do something. They wanted a big work, a whole evening. So I knew the Flaubert, and I wanted to do that. I said, that's what I want to do. So I tried it. And then I knew I could do that. It took years. It took a year, or over a year.
To complete the composition?
Complete it, yeah.
And you completed it in 1971. It looks, yeah. Mm.
So that's early on for me.
Yeah.
And then I knew I could do it. It gave me confidence. And then, oddly enough, as luck would have it for me, the commissions came for choral works. I don't know why that started it, but they came from choral works. 2 from the Mendelssohn Club in Philadelphia, who I knew the conductor, and they got support from the Pew Trust. And I did another big choral work, not as long as Julian, on the Whitman Centennial Specimen Days. And that's choral orchestral, 4 soloists and so forth.
Mm.
And then after that, took quite a while. And then after that, the cantata singers, the Mendelssohn Club again commissioned High Bridge. And that was Pew, too.
It was also nominated for a Pulitzer, right?
Yes.
So
a long project.
It's gorgeous.
So I mean, that took a long time for me, but I found I could do those. I've known other people who can't do that. Their temperament doesn't last that long. They don't get obsessed with the topic.
And you'd think in the United States with a strong middle class, which I feel like is one of our defining American
Absolutely, not
attributes.
anymore.
Right,
It's
right.
getting less and less. But I agree with you. It's a very wonderful characteristic.
So then why are we in, I feel like, a bit of a constant state of crisis in terms of funding, in the States? Obviously, we don't have the government support, right?
Yes, we'll never have it. Virgil had interesting ideas about that, and he was, I think, correct. He said there was a deep antipathy in the government to supporting anything of the arts. That's true state governments and federal governments. There's an arts council, but it's doesn't make any real impact. States have their arts councils. The government has a pathetic one.
Toothless, man.
They're never going to support the Metropolitan Opera, the New York Philharmonic, or anything like it. And if you're living in those illusions, you better think twice and move back to Europe.
Yeah. And you're a Fulbright scholar, so you spent time in a country.
I saw it, and I know it still. The Bayreuth Festival is supported by the German national government, the Bavaria, the southern government, the city of Bayreuth, the Wagner mafia.
Right.
they have all this support.
Yeah.
And that assures that Schott is never going to go out of business, as American publishers have gone out of business to a great extent. Schott is never going to go. The Berlin Philharmonic is never going to disappear. There's a guarantee there that is supported by different levels of government. We're never going to have it.
And how old were you when you were in Germany doing your Fulbright?
I was 24.
Wow. And what were you studying there?
Composition at the Hochschule. And the wall was up and fresh. Berlin was quite a place to be, as the wall was very tense.
Where do you see things standing? What do you think is left to do in terms of balancing composers such as yourself and your colleagues and composers coming up? Like, what can be done to ensure your legacy, the legacy of composers who are not fitting in this paradigm of recycled masterworks, quote unquote?
I think that's over. And I think composers now, younger composers, have a great deal of freedom because they can do anything they want, from the absolute minimal Philip Glass world to maximal, to what the European composers, some of them, are still doing with these very dense scores, But so the extremes of minimal and maximal, it's all available. And there are no prejudices anymore. You can do any damn thing you want. Whether you can make a living at it or thrive is another question. But you're going to get in this country foundation help if you need to make, as a composer, you need to make friends with, not at universities. Universities are the kiss of death. You need to make friends with performers and conductors, and there's some very good young conductors out and about, and players. And the players and singers you need to cultivate from your school days. You should take that very seriously. You should write for the singers and the players and if it turns out well, they'll play your music for a while. You just need to start early on with that. If you're waiting for it to drop down from heaven above, you're gonna.
And we need companies and foundations who are committed to
absolutely
performing underrepresented works, right? Is there anything you feel like you are still considering in terms of composition?
My greatest concern now is sitting mostly here are the final scores with all the corrections and all of most everything. And I'm very concerned about where this all lands up.
I feel like the relationship between certainly composers and performers, impresarios, directors, I feel like we have a really sacred bond in terms of ensuring legacies and ensuring that the value is not only recognized but preserved and maintained.
It's no laughing matter. As far as music is concerned, it's a narrow field. But I felt it doesn't matter where your music is, so long as it's in one place.
Mm. Do you still have projects yet to write?
To write?
Mm-hmm.
Not particularly. With Highbridge, I felt I did what I could do.
Mm-hmm. And that was the third Pulitzer
yes.
nomination, right?
I really had a feeling, well, that's the best I can do.
It's extraordinarily
It's
beautiful.
a strange feeling, but that's how I felt.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, well, that's what I can do.
Yeah.
And so what I'm concerned most with is the state of the scores and the materials. I have some parts here and things. I want it to go somewhere. And fortunately, there are three former students who've appeared as kind of good angels. Mm. They want to take care of all that. But two of them are now putting in, I had a very good hand as a composer, handwritten.
Certainly, your manuscript is gorgeous.
Some of it has really got better. But they're wanting to engrave it now. That's what they're doing. Thing works.
That's wonderful, and as it should be.
That's what I'm thinking about. All that. I don't want it to be on the streets.
It will never. We can promise. I can promise. Everyone who knows and loves you can promise it would never be on the streets.
It's not going to be.
So, well, Maestro, I cannot thank you enough for taking this time and generously sharing all of your wisdom and your music with us. I can't wait to sing your aria in the concert. I'm really looking forward to that and having you there.
Well, you were very easy to talk to and you had good questions. So that's always a pleasure.
Thank you.